We're in a deadly race between politics and technology, says Peter Thiel, and this is something to be taken very seriously. I've just been to the United States, for example, in Los Angeles, and there's this National Center for the Preservation of Democracy, and I said, oh wow, that's nice, but then the next thing I noticed is this. So, under your skin, into your mind, out of control. What is really going on in this world? And what I'm telling you today is not thought to be for the general public, right? The problems of the world are complex. We're faced with financial, economic, and spending crisis, with conflict and war, with climate change. These are existential problems. They decide about life and death of people. And we need to solve these problems. So would big data fix the world? Chris Anderson claimed that if we just had enough data, the truth would basically reveal itself. We would not even need science. And that sounds like a great thing. So people said, okay, let's just collect enough data. In particular, if knowledge is power, then we could fix all these problems. And that's what happened. So basically, it was decided to get all that data, and all sorts of traps were created for us to deliver this data when we go shopping, no matter whether you do that online or whether you do that in a classical shop, when you move, when you make friends, when you store your files in the cloud, when you use Gmail and other email accounts, when you read your Amazon reader, it's basically collecting all the data, how much time you spend on each page, what you mark and all this. So these technologies are basically recording everything, including what you think about, what you say, what you view and watch, and what you do at home. And also our fingerprints, and finally our biological material too, right? This is happening for that very reason, that some people believe that if we just had all that data, we could fix the world. So can we know everything if we just had enough data? Can we know what's going on in any part of the world as it happens? Could we build a crystal ball? And could we use all that data to optimize the world and rule it like a wise king or a benevolent dictator? I'd like to object, because I don't believe that this magic formula that more data means more knowledge means more power means more success, is automatically true. In many cases it doesn't work, even though that sounds extremely plausible. I'll give some examples. Google Flu Trends was presented as one of the major success stories of big data analytics. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that well. Another thing, 23andMe came up with this kit to basically predict the likelihood of certain kind of diseases if you just hand them over your genetic material. And it was decided by the health authority that this had to be taken off the market. And it doesn't happen very often in a free economy, but they had good reasons for this. And also, if the Silicon Valley and other IT countries would really know how to build a better society, a paradise on earth, why then is no city in those big IT nations on this list of most livable cities in the world? I'll go in detail now. More data does not necessarily mean more knowledge. On the contrary, if you have more data, we'll see more spurious patterns in these data. If you look up in the sky, you believe to see meaningful patterns, but many of those patterns don't actually have a meaning from the point of view of science. If you look into data, you will find correlations like this one. Number of serial killers is a function of chocolate consumption. So if this was true, then we would be living very dangerous in Switzerland. We would have, in the sense of predictive policing, we would have to put all those people in prison that eat a lot of chocolate just, to provide security in our society, and to show how ridiculous this correlation-based arguments are, which unfortunately are being used also in predictive policing. I'll present you this other example. It turns out that the number of forest fires increases with the number of children eating ice cream. So from the point of predictive policing, if you want to make sure that we wouldn't have forest fires anymore, we would put them all in prison. Right. So, that basically shows that some of the big data analytics that's going on in the world has the level of astrology and nothing more. Of course, that doesn't apply to all big data analytics. There is serious data science that looks into causal relationships and so on, but we really need to make sure stupid stuff will be stopped. There's this other thing that banks and insurance companies want to distinguish good and bad risks, right? They want to make as much money as possible, we can understand that. And police and also secret services want to distinguish good people from terrorists. Unfortunately, what they find is this. Data are overlapping, there's no clear separation, and that implies that there will be errors of first and second kind. That means there will be false alarms, and in other cases, alarms don't go off. And that is the problem, and in particular related to terrorism. We have seen that many times, and there are actually many people on those lists of terror suspects that would never do anything bad. But the problem is there is no method really to clearly separate. And we need to be aware of this in order to treat people reasonable. So there are reasons why the wise king would often fail to take wise decisions. And one of the reasons is that our processing power, even though it increases exponentially, doesn't catch up with the amount of data available. Data volume doubles every year. That means, and it's hard to imagine, that within 1 year we produce as much data as in the entire history of humankind. All the years before. So it's an incredible amount of data. And because this curve is accelerating faster than the other curve, the gap between the data that exists and the data we can process is ever increasing. The percentage of data we can process is going down in time. It creates a flashlight effect. We need to know where to point our flashlight at, because otherwise we won't see the things that matter. And in fact, in many cases, we've overlooked relevant developments. Most people didn't foresee the financial crisis. Most people didn't see the Arab Spring coming. It's said that secret services also didn't know. The crisis in Ukraine came as a surprise. Spreading of Ebola was something that the authorities replied to much too late. These are just some examples of these flashlight effects. Of course, the data have been there, but we didn't pay attention to them. Now, more knowledge does not necessarily mean more power. It's true that there's quite some knowledge about each and every one of us, and that our lives, at least of many people, are pretty predictable. We have our weekly schedules, and companies like Recorded Future claim that they can predict our behavior to 90% of time. But that doesn't mean that we would be able to predict the future of society, because interactions can change everything, and we all know this. One day you meet the person of your life, you fall in love, that changes your life entirely, and it might change the lives of other people too, particularly when you are powerful. The same thing applies actually to many other systems. So even though a single car is well controllable, we cannot easily control the interaction between cars, and that's why things like phantom traffic jams happen. Even if we could really read all those thoughts of those people, if we could read the minds, that couldn't stop the traffic jams from happening. We would see it come, okay, but we couldn't stop it. And we don't need to know about the thoughts of people to understand this phenomenon, because here's some mathematical formula that describes stop-and-go traffic, but it doesn't need to know anything about people's thoughts. What's going on here is that this is an unstable system, so small variations will be amplified, and there is a domino effect or cascading effect that makes this effect bigger and bigger, and in the end something happens that nobody wanted. People here seem to have all the information that they need. They're well educated and have a driver's license. They have the very best intention to avoid this, but it's still happening. And these kinds of things happen when there is systemic instability. And another example is the emergence of tragedies of the commons. It would be favorable for everyone if everyone was cooperative, but cooperation in these social dilemma situations is equally unstable as the free traffic flow was unstable. That's why cooperation erodes, and we end up in desirable outcomes. Systemic instability can also occur in supply chains, in our world economy, where it produces booms and recessions. It can produce the spreading of crime, can produce crowd disasters. Here, nobody wants to kill anyone else, but a lot of people can die. Again, the system gets out of control. Conflicts, you can very well imagine most people who get divorced didn't intend to get divorced. Basically, the interaction got out of control, and similar things happen between countries, unfortunately. So again, instability is behind this phenomenon, and the same applies to revolutions. And one of the reasons why these systems get out of control is that when a system is unstable, a small local perturbation can eventually mess up the entire system. And while this is a nice experiment for a rainy weekend, unfortunately, this kind of dynamics happens in reality too. We've seen it during the financial crisis. After the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers, actually hundreds of other banks collapsed. It created created cost of hundreds of billions of dollars, and obviously this system is not behaving as it should be. So it's wrongly designed from my point of view. Then more power does not necessarily mean more success, and we have seen that actually after September 11. No question, the United States is a superpower. It has a lot of power. But the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq nevertheless ended very differently from what was expected. Instead of getting things under control, conflict spread in the entire region, and now we have really a very serious situation in Syria and elsewhere. And like a boomerang effect, now this is coming back to us. It creates terror threats in many countries, and people get scared, and we have a refugee crisis and many other problems that are the result of a many-year-long cascading effect. So let's look at this again, because there is another curve that we need to pay attention to, which is systemic complexity. As we go on networking the world, there are combinatorial opportunities to recombine what we have, and that creates a factorial explosion of complexity, so that even overtakes the amount of data we have. And as a result, it's predicted that we lose top-down controllability. If you have attended the World Economic Forum this year, it seems like, yeah, we basically lost control over the world already. Pretty clear. The good news is, and we'll come back to this later on, there is another possibility to control systems, which is distributed control. So, summarizing this first part, I'd like to say we need more wisdom rather than more power. And it's easy to understand if you think of our body as another example of a complex dynamical system. Basically, if we have a disease, then we take medicine, but it's important what kind of medicine we take, when we take it, how often, what amount of medicine. More medicine is not better. It could poison our body. 40 minutes altogether.
20.
No, that was... No.
Okay, good.
So it's really important to understand how complex systems work, and that there can be interaction effects, and that can also basically undermine functionality. So are there other solutions? Would superintelligence fix the world? Well, in fact, we have now an exponential increase of artificial intelligence capability, and some people think in about 20 years' time, some people think earlier, others think later, we'll have computer systems that outperform humans. And in fact, in the past we had already better chess players, we've better workers in many areas of production, better drivers most likely, better doctors. So this is IBM Watson, and the same system seems to be able to answer questions better than humans, many questions at least, for which there is already an answer. And it's pretty clear that we are now seeing the next industrial revolution. And when we look into the history book, then we know we've seen transitions of this kind before, transition from agricultural to the industrial society, from the industrial to the service society, and now to the digital society. Now, these transitions, unfortunately, always came along with financial and economic crises, also revolutions and wars. We already have this financial economic crisis. We have to do everything to prevent a revolution and a war, and we'll see that this will become important later on. So some people think, well, what could be a new paradigm to run our society? Could society be run like a giant machine? After the automation of production and self-driving cars, would the automation of society be next? That's the question that I'm asking in my new book. And in fact, that leads us to cybernetic societies. Chile was the first country to build one. At that time, it was just involving production, but the human factor was kind of not taken care of. It remained uncontrollable for a long time. But that has changed, because now countries like Singapore are seeing themselves like a social laboratory, and in principle, it turns out that people are more controllable than we thought. And there are also companies that want to reprogram the state. They want to come up with an operating system for society. And the same applies to this cognitive technology. So how would it work? Basically, we use deep learning and other kinds of machine learning technologies that would take all that data that has been secretly collected about every one of us and use it to learn what we do, why we do it, and how we can be manipulated in our behavior. And this manipulation is being done with personalized information on our computers, on our smartphones, and so on. So this is used in advertisements, personalized ads, but also elsewhere. And the underlying paradigm is this: Skinner's behavioralism. And Skinner basically came up with this Skinner box and put animals inside and gave them rewards and punishment to make them do certain kind of things. So he conditioned them. And this is now being done with humans, with us, every day. In fact, companies like Google do millions of experiments every day with human beings to see how we respond to certain information presented, whether we click certain links, and how we can be made to click these links. And basically, the Skinner box we're living in is called the filter bubble. That means the information world that is built around us, that we see. As I said, our attention in times of short attention, in overflooding with information, can be easily steered. And it's also being used actually in politics. There it's called nudging, in combination with all that big data about us. It's big nudging, and it's so effective that we would in many cases not notice that we are being manipulated. It's a subconscious effect, and if you see these pictures, then it becomes pretty clear that to some extent is already happening. There is some remote control of people, and that's by intention. And it's not just me saying this, but there are more and more articles that basically look into this in more detail. So we're becoming marionettes, and the underlying paradigm is this of the optimization of the world. I was talking about the wise king or benevolent dictator, and yeah, that's the idea. And if you believe in this idea, then it would be the right thing to tear down democracy. And this is now actually happening. Our society is a crossroads. It's possible to build data-driven societies of different kinds to kind of revive different historical models, and it's possible to build fascism 2.0, a big brother and brave new world society, possible to build communism 2.0, a big mother society, you could say, based on this idea of benevolent dictator. It's also possible to build feudalism 2.0, the big other society. And now, basically, these things are happening now as we see that in Turkey, in Poland, in France, and elsewhere. Now, the question is, would we just be manipulated by information that doesn't seem to hurt? Or would other things happen? Would we be punished? And in fact, this nudging can manipulate us, but it's not 100% effective. So it would be nice if we could to lose our weight and to behave in an environmental friendly way, in a peaceful way, just by presenting us certain kind of information. So this is not efficient enough, and that's why people think about other ways of creating feedback loops. For example, personalized pricing, where we in fact have a reward and punishment mechanism as in the Skinner box, and also citizen scores, as they're currently tested in China, but there are similar programs elsewhere too. And the issue here is that every citizen would get plus and minus points for everything they do, including what they click in the internet and whether their political opinion seems to be aligned with the government or not. And also what their friends and family do. And that would determine the conditions for which they get a loan, the jobs that they can get, and the travel visa to other countries. The very same technology is also being used elsewhere. For example, to assess security at airports. So there's also a scoring system, and everything which is kind of not average would get you minus points, like moaning, laughing, combing your hairs, and all these kind of things. Well, actually, those people who operate the system know it doesn't really work. Still, this is in operation, right? And there's predictive policing too, and it now goes so far that some people suggest that sentencing should take into account the prediction of future behavior, even though that hasn't even happened. And these algorithms might also take into account what your neighbors do. Next level of punishment would be electrical shocks, as we've seen now for the animals, and that technology is out there too. So this is being used actually to train your brain to don't show certain kind of behavior. And there is another totalitarian development, which is that we put everything in number and then we measure the value of people in terms of numbers. And I find that very scary because this has happened before, and I wonder whether we are running potentially in similar problems. You know, we should really pay attention to what we are doing. Is this selection based on CRISPR-9 and other gene technology, is this ethically really to be supported, or are there issues over here? And same thing, think of people with diseases, right? Suppose there's not enough medicine or not enough flu immunization shots and all these kind of things, you know, who would get these resources? So we're getting into decisions over life and death. We're getting into these ethical dilemmas. And when you talk about the self-driving cars, you should always consider you're talking about medical cases too, and you're talking also about the future of our society. Should this car hit the cat, the person? Should it go down the cliff? Very difficult decisions. Or should the driver himself die? Yeah, and so I think there are much bigger questions behind this than just the self-driving cars and what they would do. So now we're getting towards implants, and of course there's this plan to promote this, to provide legal identity for everyone, and most likely the pharmaceutical industry would discover this as a possibility to release certain kind of medicine to the body just in the right dose at the right time. And so, it would be sold to us as something which is very favorable for our life, to improve our health and all these kind of things. There's just one problem, that these devices could be hacked. As cars have been hacked, as planes have been hacked, and as basically everything has been hacked. So cybercrime is exploding, costs us $3 trillion a year. US military has been hacked, Pentagon has been hacked, White House, Bundestag. And now, I think it's highly dangerous to go this way, and I would like to say, stop, it's enough, right? The root of all these problems is actually the lack of sustainability. So we are in a situation where decisions about life and death are impending. We have crossed the planetary boundaries for certain kind of resources such as phosphorus and nitrogen. And actually what is ahead of us might be estimated when you go back to this Limits to Growth book from 1972. That was highly controversial, and we said, it's wrong. But then US president commissioned this Global 2000 report. It basically supported the conclusions with some variation, of course. But there is one problem over here, right? We are now eventually running into a situation where population would go down dramatically. The carrying capacity of our Earth would go down. So it seems like these predictions aren't too bad. And so we need to take them seriously. And in fact, if you look at how the face of the Earth changed over time, then this is very concerning. And this is the Arctic, this is the Aral Sea, and this is the water footprint. And in fact, we've gotten ourselves into a situation where globalization doesn't solve the resource issues anymore. Now there is a desperate race to Mars for that reason, because we need more resources. And otherwise, we would, many people, a billion or two maybe in the worst case, or even more, would have to die. Unfortunately, that sounds alarmistic, but we have to take it seriously because the population size has increased a lot, and this increase came along with consumption of oil, gas, and coal. And now, with the climate deal in Paris, we've decided to reduce the amount of oil, gas, and coal we would use. So that has implications for the carrying capacity if we don't manage actually to come up with a better way of using the resources of the world. So we might lose everything: self-determination, freedom, human dignity, justice, happiness, pluralism, democracy, and so on, peace, jobs, and our lives, unfortunately. And these are our options, it seems. Global war, global pandemics, euthanasia, fascism 2.0, communism, feudalism 2.0, a revolution leading to redistribution, or a new socio-economic framework that I call democracy 2.0 and capitalism 2.0 that we can now build with the technology that just became available: Internet of Things, FinTech, combined with complexity science. And why do I recommend to go this path? Not only because we could mitigate these crises dramatically and maybe even overcome it completely, but also we need more innovation. More innovation needs more freedom. We know that, the data says this, and also more diversity makes more highly performing systems. So that speaks for democracy and capitalism rather than these benevolent dictator approaches or feudalism 2.0, a world run just by some big companies. And so that system would be built on bottom-up self-organization, would be efficient, flexible, adaptive, resilient. It would provide entrepreneurial and individual freedoms. It would have high innovation rates. The new thing is that network interactions become more and more important. And with this, a systemic and ecosystem thinking, co-creation, co-evolution, collective intelligence related to this. And we've actually started to work on a system that would support this. Of course, we're just at the beginning, but I think we would really have to massively invest into this in order to overcome these crises. NervousNet is the system, the platform I'm talking about. It's built on Internet of Things technology. It's using smartphones. Smartphones have 15 sensors approximately in them. You can add other sensors, and we can actually connect these smartphones to build a global measurement systems and thereby measure the situation of the world, of the environment, and how it changes, and the resources, and so on. Just the point is, we'd like to have a system that we can trust, not just a system that spies on us. So informational self-determination is important for us, and that's why we allow the users to open up and close each sensor separately and to decide whether they would want to use these data just for themselves or share the data with others. So the proposal is to run the Internet of Things as a citizen web. And this NervousNet could do many nice things for us: real-time measurement, increase awareness, support scientific progress, self-organization, and collective intelligence. To give a little bit more of an idea, let's look into this acceleration measurements. Just one smartphone starts shaking, that doesn't mean anything, but if all our smartphones would shake at the same time, that would probably mean there is an earthquake. We would want our friends and family to be alerted to get out in a safe space quickly. Can use our smartphones to map crisis, to help ourselves, to help each other, but also to help the authorities to get a better overview. So we can create greater awareness, we can map resources and who uses them, and we've built a system called SwarmPulse to do this. We can create new compasses for decision makers that measure and display things that we can't see, hear, or feel, such as social capital, reputation, for example. see what is wrong, where the system is broken, how to fix it. We can support self-organization in the system, and we can overcome in this way traffic jams, for example. We can run complex systems much more efficiently, as we've shown actually for urban environments, all based on local interactions and decentralized technology, and that's also becoming more important in smart grids and Industry 4.0. And finally, collective intelligence is again a distributed approach which basically brings together the best knowledge and ideas of many people. And the main point here is that not the best individual solution actually wins, but the combination of some solutions. So diversity wins, not the best, and that requires online deliberation platform and building digital democracy. I think this is a good point to finish and give you some time for discussion. Thank you very much.